Hi, everyone.
Hello. In the finished mystery, we are now on page 117.
Mm-hmm.
Taking two verses this time. We've seen them use 3 or 4 pages, sometimes 10 pages, to do one verse. This time, 2 verses in less than a page. And those 2 verses we'll read from the New World Translation. Just to make the point, though, before we even get started, we said yesterday that the previous section is really their take on 1,000 years or more, from the time of the creeds for 4th and 5th century to the time of the Reformation. Now they're going to get deep into why they need the Reformation, but really the Reformation isn't about the Reformers. We'll find out pretty soon. It's really about Russell and the Russellites in the years 1914 to whenever the end comes, which in those days, as we've seen already, would be 1918, when Babylon will fall and something else will happen. God's people, including Russell's works, will be vindicated.
You're going to see this clearly from these 2 verses.
Right. So here's the 2 verses in the New World Translation.
All right. It's 9 and 10. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those slaughtered because of the word of God, and because of the witness they had given. They shouted with a loud voice, saying, "Until when, Sovereign Lord, holy and true, are you refraining from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?"
Well, obviously, without the help of the Watchtower, or Charles Taze Russell and the gang, we would come to the conclusion this is talking about martyrs. Souls crying out from under the altar. And I know what I used to do with this in the old days. I would always compare it to Genesis, God saying to Cain, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the earth.
They do that.
They do that here. But of course you got to observe right away the word. The word is not blood here, is it? It's not
souls.
The blood crying out. It's the souls.
And
individual souls.
And if you define souls as the Watchtower does, as basically you became a living soul when you started to breathe.
Yeah.
That seems to be the way they define it. If you're a breather, well, this is not a symbolic, their blood is calling out. This says souls. The souls
personal
are
souls
speaking here, crying out.
So whatever you do with that, and at the bottom of the page, they say, well, they're obviously not in heaven if they're under the altar. Well, that's a fair take, I suppose.
But who said they had to be in heaven for there to be some kind of existence?
But what was the belief of the time? It was that whatever survived your physical death, whether you call it soul or spirit, was somewhere. So you don't, of course, you can't acknowledge that. So you have to do backflips here, and they do some backflips by, first of all, they say the beings of those that had died. That's how they define the souls. Have you ever heard them define souls as beings?
No, but I would think that wouldn't help modern day witnesses, anyways, calling them beings, because that sounds like something that's alive.
Something personal.
That's
Yeah. And then when you get to the next page, the top of 118, you've got a strange combination that I don't think I've seen in Watchtower literature in the modern times.
And I just said what, like to almost every paragraph after this.
It says spiritually beheaded. That is, the men that were slain were spiritually beheaded.
And I thought, what does that mean? And then it goes on about the word of God. It says, it is this sword of the Spirit that cuts us off from the world. And then the next paragraph has a sentence that says, it is the word that does the beheading. What is this all about? It's so strange. But I think I figured it out because this is where they introduce the Abel's blood thing.
Yeah.
They want you to spiritualize a lot of stuff before you get to that point. Because if you can spiritualize things away from those verses, then you can introduce another spiritual thing.
So what would this all have meant to the first hearers? Of course, you didn't have your own text of the Bible in those days when Revelation was first published, right, around 100. AD. What would it have meant to them? Well, they knew what it meant because they were experiencing martyrdom. The whole book of Revelation is to prepare the people of that generation and beyond, but especially the people of that generation who were under the persecution of the Roman Empire. And it was the first widespread sustained persecution. The book of Revelation is written during that period in the late 90s. So they're preparing the saints for martyrdom. Literal martyrdom, not spiritual beheading.
Yeah.
And why? Because they are faithful to the Word of God. The Word of God is the Word of God. It's not, well, whatever you're puzzling about it being here when it says, where's that phrase?
It cuts us off from the world, and
so beheading becomes severing or cutting off from the world.
Yeah, and that does the beheading. The Word does the beheading.
So this is not only not about the reformers, it's about the first century, and it's not about you. 1914 onwards.
And it's redefining words all over the place here.
And then
so you end up not being able to take anything at its word. Words don't mean anything anymore. You can just stretch them all over the place.
When you get to the question, though, that the souls are asking, Lord, Sovereign Lord, how long before we are vindicated, before we get our reward? When you get to that, suddenly there's a date intruded into it. How long will it be from this particular time, the spring of 1518? Then you ask, if you've only got this context, what's 1518 got to do with anything?
Well, it's because they've been saying that this whole period is Reformation, right?
Yeah, which of course is an assertion you don't even believe it yourself anymore.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't say it in the text.
The fifth seal is therefore the Reformation. So you have to go back to the reference they give you here, which is to chapter 3, verse 7 in Revelation, and that's on page 48 in the Finished Mystery. So here's what they said back about 3:7 and on page 48. The next messenger to the church, by the way, this is the days of, remember the sixth church, Philadelphia? Again,
they've got them
their
all
take was that
applying
the
to
epochs of the church.
Yeah.
So this is the church of Philadelphia. The next messenger to the church was Martin Luther. Okay, Reformation. There is considerable similarity between the work begun on Pentecost and that of Luther. The Reformation was, in a sense, the beginning of a new era, a dawning of light. That's interesting. They don't really teach much about the reformers having much light because they disagree with their teaching. Where all had been in darkness, a new start in the way of truth. And then they add also from the Watchtower, Philadelphia means brotherly love. This stage of the church's history began at the Reformation, and there are many still living who possess the characteristics described. The exact point of time at which the Philadelphia epoch of the church began was at midday, October 31, 1517. It was at that hour that Luther nailed his 95 Theses of the church to the church door at Wittenberg. And then they say, interestingly, nailing up that paper was the beginning of a great division in the church. Well, what's great division of the church? The Reformation got to do with brotherly love. But it's also arbitrary.
Yeah.
And why do you need 1518, therefore? Because you say that the year, that is the secular year, begins in October, the calendar year, the secular calendar year of Israel, and therefore extends into 1518. Why do you need 1518? Because you've already made your case in this book earlier, and will again in the next few pages, that 1918 is going to see something extraordinary. But even before, yeah.
Another epoch, I'm guessing.
But that's not the major point you're making here on page, what was it again? 117?
Oh, yeah, it's 118.
Going back to where we started?
Yeah, we started at 117.
Yeah, on that page, the point you're making is not about 1918, not quite, not yet anyway. You're making a point about 360-day years going by from the beginning of the Philadelphia period to a date you need, 1878, when you showed up.
Yeah.
So what happens in 1878? Well, they tell you in their application of the phrase and avenge our blood. Again, the request, how long till you avenge our blood?
Yeah.
About the phrase avenge our blood, they say, cast off from all favor a system of nominal Christianity, which is not Christianity at all. In other words, Babylon will fall. No, actually, they're saying it has fallen. It fell in 1878, and at the same time as it fell, the resurrection, the reward of the martyred saints occurred. So as a witness, do you believe that in 1878, Babylon fell?
Well, they scrapped that, and so a witness doesn't think that.
So we'll get into more about that next time. What's the significance of 1878, and therefore the year after that, when the Watchtower was founded? How does that move into the future? Well, it did, didn't it? It moved. You moved the fall of Babylon to 1918-19, and the selection of you to be God's servants and only servants on earth to
observing
be
you
the same
and
time.
picking you.
Yeah.
So it's about you again.
So this is not about the early church, which it clearly is if you read the context. The church of 100 A.D. in Asia Minor, to be more precise. It's not about the reformers. It's about you, as their prophetic fulfillments are still.
Yeah.
What's our link?
The first of the Humpty series, which is about manipulation of words, where words don't mean anything, and the playlist with which is it is in is hermeneutics, how to understand the Bible, right?
How to interpret the Bible properly. Yeah. See you next time.